The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room fell completely silent. Senator Lindsey Graham, who had been repeatedly interrupting Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett throughout her testimony, suddenly froze in his chair. The veteran South Carolina senator, known for his sharp questioning and commanding presence in congressional hearings, appeared momentarily stunned. Across the chamber, Congresswoman Crockett remained composed, her gaze steady as she finished her statement. The document she had just referenced, a transcript of Graham's own words from a 2018 hearing, lay open before her, highlighted sections clearly visible to the committee members and cameras. "Senator Graham," Crockett said, her voice measured but resolute, "I've patiently allowed 5 interruptions during my testimony. Each time you've suggested my understanding of congressional procedure is flawed. However, this transcript shows you taking the exact position I'm advocating today, word for word, when the political dynamics were reversed. I respectfully ask to complete my testimony without further interruption." The chamber remained silent as all eyes shifted to Graham, whose typical rapid response was nowhere to be found. The chairman leaned forward. "The gentlewoman may continue without interruption. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable exchange, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive coverage of pivotal moments in American politics." Jasmine Crockett had built her reputation in Congress through methodical preparation and composure under pressure. Before her election to represent Texas's 30th congressional district, Crockett had established herself as a formidable civil rights attorney, known for maintaining her poise during contentious courtroom proceedings. This legal background had prepared her for the often confrontational nature of congressional hearings. At 43, Crockett represented a newer generation of congressional representatives who approached oversight hearings with both academic rigor and real-world legal experience. Her colleagues frequently noted her exceptional ability to recall specific details from legislative histories and precedents, a skill developed during her years as a trial attorney, when case outcomes often hinged on precise procedural knowledge. Lindsey Graham, in contrast, had been a fixture in Washington politics for decades. First elected to the House in 1995 before moving to the Senate in 2003, the 68-year-old South Carolina Republican had participated in countless high-profile hearings, including the impeachment proceedings of 2 presidents. Known for his sharp questioning style and occasional temperamental exchanges, Graham had developed a reputation as one of the Senate's most formidable interlocutors. The context for their confrontation was a joint Senate-House Judiciary Committee hearing examining proposed changes to federal judicial nomination procedures. As a member of the House Judiciary Committee, Crockett had been invited to testify regarding the impact of these changes on judicial diversity and representation. The political tensions surrounding the hearing were significant. With a closely divided Senate and an upcoming presidential election, the stakes for controlling judicial nominations were exceptionally high. Graham, as a senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, had positioned himself as a defender of existing procedures that gave senators substantial influence over the confirmation process. In the weeks leading up to her testimony, Crockett had anticipated potential lines of questioning, particularly from senators who might view her proposals as threatening their traditional prerogatives. Rather than relying on general statements of principle, she had methodically researched the historical positions of key committee members, including Graham, on judicial nomination procedures. Particularly notable was her staff's discovery of a 2018 hearing transcript, in which Graham had advocated for precisely the procedural changes he now opposed, a position shift that appeared to correlate with changes in which party controlled the White House. Crockett had highlighted these sections of the transcript and placed them in a binder organized by Senator, anticipating that she might need to reference these historical statements. For his part, Graham had arrived at the hearing prepared to challenge what he viewed as an encroachment on senatorial authority. Having read Crockett's submitted testimony in advance, he had identified several points of contention where he planned to assert his experience and institutional knowledge against what he perceived as her more limited understanding of Senate traditions. The stage was set for a collision between Graham's assertive, questioning style and Crockett's methodical preparation, a contrast in approaches that would soon produce one of the most memorable Exchanges in recent congressional hearing history. The mahogany paneling of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room gleamed under the bright lights as Chairman Richard Durbin called the hearing to order. Today we consider proposed modifications to the federal judicial nomination process, he began, his voice carrying through the chamber. Our first witness is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who serves on the House Judiciary Committee. Crockett approached the witness table with measured steps, arranging her materials methodically before addressing the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify regarding these important procedural matters that impact the diversity and efficiency of our federal judiciary. She began outlining statistics demonstrating disparities in judicial representation and the impact of delayed confirmations on court functioning. Several senators nodded as she presented data showing that the average confirmation time had increased from 28 days in the 1980s to over 250 days currently. The procedural changes proposed in H.R. 4092 would establish reasonable timelines for consideration of nominees without diminishing the Senate's advisory role, Crockett explained. These modifications would help ensure our courts reflect the diversity of legal experience and background necessary for balanced jurisprudence. Senator Graham, who had been reviewing documents while Crockett spoke, suddenly looked up. "Congresswoman," he interjected, not waiting to be recognized by the chairman. "With all due respect, the House doesn't determine Senate rules. This proposal fundamentally misunderstands the constitutional separation." "Senator Graham," Chairman Durbin intervened, "please allow the witness to complete her statement before questioning." Graham nodded briefly, though his expression suggested impatience rather than agreement. Crockett resumed her testimony, addressing the constitutional concerns directly. The proposal explicitly preserves the Senate's advice and consent authority while creating procedural guardrails to prevent nominees from languishing without consideration. This approach is consistent with— "But that's precisely the problem," Graham interrupted again, his southern accent more pronounced as his volume increased. "These guardrails, as you call them, effectively pressure the Senate to rubber-stamp nominees without proper vetting. I've been on this committee for 20 years, and I can tell you—" "Senator Graham," Durbin interjected more firmly, "the witness has the floor." Crockett maintained her composure, neither rushing her words nor showing irritation. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was explaining, these procedural timelines are designed to ensure consideration, not to dictate outcomes. Nominees could still be rejected after receiving a hearing and vote." She continued by citing examples of qualified nominees who never received hearings despite bipartisan support. As she detailed the case of a nominee who waited 742 days without committee action, Graham shook his head visibly. "Congresswoman," he interrupted for a third time, "you're describing exceptional cases as though they're the norm. The Senate's deliberative process is intentionally thorough. When the founders designed—" "Senator Graham," Durbin said sharply, "this is the third time you've interrupted. The witness will be recognized for questions after completing her testimony." Graham leaned back, making a show of checking his watch. Crockett continued steadily. "The data indicates these are not exceptional cases. Over the past decade, 43% of nominees to district courts waited more than 200 days for a hearing, with significant disparities in wait times for female nominees and nominees of color." As she began discussing the impact of these delays on judicial dockets, Graham leaned toward his microphone again. "Those statistics are misleading without context," he stated, speaking over her. "Different nominees require different levels of scrutiny. When I was working with President Obama—" "Senator Graham," Durbin warned, his patience visibly thinning. Graham raised his hands in frustration but fell silent. Crockett paused briefly before continuing. "The proposed timelines, 120 days for a hearing and 180 days for a floor vote, still provide ample opportunity for thorough vetting while preventing indefinite delays used as de facto rejections without accountability." As she began detailing the historical precedent for such procedural reforms, Graham's frustration appeared to peak. "Congresswoman," he interrupted for a fifth time, his voice sharper than before, "you're lecturing this committee about Senate procedures when many of us have spent decades—" Senator Graham. Durbin's gavel came down with unusual force. Graham continued speaking over the chairman. Decades overseeing nominations. Your proposal would fundamentally alter the constitutional balance that has served this nation for over 2 centuries. A tense silence fell over the hearing room as Durbin's gavel came down again. Before the chairman could speak, Crockett calmly opened a binder on the table before her and removed a single page. Senator Graham, she said, her voice steady and clear, I've patiently allowed 5 interruptions during my testimony. Each time you've suggested my understanding of congressional procedure is flawed. However, this transcript shows you taking the exact position I'm advocating today, word for word, when the political dynamics were reversed. She held up the document so cameras could clearly capture it. During the April 12, 2018 hearing on judicial nominations, you stated, and I quote, "The Senate's advice and consent role is not fulfilled by indefinite delay. Setting reasonable timelines for consideration maintains the Senate's authority, while ensuring qualified nominees receive fair consideration. No nominee should wait more than 6 months for a vote. That's just common sense." The chamber fell completely silent as Crockett continued. "Those aren't my words, Senator Graham. They're yours. The procedural changes I'm supporting today are nearly identical to those you advocated when judicial nominees from your preferred party were experiencing delays." Graham's expression shifted from confrontational to stunned as he recognized his own words. The veteran senator, typically quick with a retort, remained silent. "I respectfully ask to complete my testimony without further interruption," Crockett concluded calmly. The chairman nodded. "The gentlewoman may continue without interruption." As Crockett resumed her testimony, the dynamics in the hearing room had fundamentally shifted. Graham, who moments earlier had dominated through repeated interruptions, now sat back in his chair, occasionally glancing at his staff as if seeking verification of the quote she had cited. Crockett continued with the same measured tone, showing neither triumph nor aggression after effectively silencing her interrupter. "To be clear," she said, "reasonable minds can disagree about the specific timelines appropriate for judicial confirmations. The proposal before this committee, 120 days for a hearing and 180 days for a floor vote, actually provides more flexibility than the 6-month total timeline. Senator Graham advocated in 2018. What shouldn't be controversial is the principle that qualified nominees deserve consideration within a reasonable time frame. This isn't about partisanship. It's about the functioning of our judiciary and the Americans waiting for their cases to be heard in understaffed courts." Throughout the remainder of her testimony, Graham remained uncharacteristically silent. Other committee members, seemingly struck by the exchange they had just witnessed, listened with heightened attention as Crockett methodically outlined the proposed changes and their anticipated effects on judicial efficiency. When she concluded, Chairman Durbin thanked her for her testimony and opened the floor for questions. "Senator Grassley, you're recognized for 5 minutes. The senior Iowa Republican leaned forward. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Crockett, while I may not agree with all aspects of your proposal, I appreciate your thorough presentation. Instead of focusing on past disagreements, I'd like to explore potential compromise positions." This unexpectedly constructive tone from a senior Republican signaled a departure from the confrontational approach Graham had initiated. Several subsequent questioners from both parties similarly engaged with the substance of Crockett's testimony, rather than challenging her authority to present it. When Graham's turn for questions finally arrived, observers anticipated a potential recovery attempt or confrontational response. Instead, the senator adopted a notably different approach. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his tone more measured than before, "you've clearly done your homework on the history of this issue. While I maintain that different political contexts require different considerations, I believe we share the goal of a functioning judiciary." He paused before continuing. "The quote you referenced from 2018 reflected my frustration with specific circumstances at that time. Today's circumstances are different, but perhaps there's room for finding common ground on some procedural guardrails, provided they maintain the Senate's substantive authority." This partial concession, about as close to an apology as congressional decorum typically allows, represented a remarkable shift from his earlier posture. By acknowledging the legitimacy of her preparation and opening the door to potential compromise, Graham had effectively conceded the exchange. Crockett responded with equal professionalism, neither dwelling on her earlier point nor taking a victory lap. "Thank you, Senator Graham. I appreciate that acknowledgement. I agree that maintaining the Senate's substantive authority is essential, which is why the proposal focuses on process rather than outcomes. I would welcome the opportunity to work with your office on language that addresses your concerns while still ensuring timely consideration." This exchange, substantive and respectful despite following their earlier tense confrontation, demonstrated Crockett's ultimate objective wasn't embarrassing Graham, but advancing institutional reform. Her willingness to engage constructively, after effectively countering his interruptions, reflected a strategic approach to advocacy focused on outcomes rather than personal vindication. As the hearing continued, several observers noted the shift in tone that had followed Crockett's decisive response. Rather than escalating into partisan bickering, the discussion had become notably more substantive and solution-oriented. By the hearing's conclusion, Chairman Durbin noted, "Today's discussion has been unusually productive. I want to thank our witnesses, particularly Congresswoman Crockett, whose testimony helped focus our attention on the substantive issues rather than procedural disagreements." This acknowledgement underscored the impact of Crockett's approach, not just in countering Graham's interruptions, but in elevating the entire hearing to a more constructive level. What had begun as an attempt to dismiss her expertise had instead showcased her exceptional preparation and poise, transforming a potentially contentious hearing into a model for how substantive policy disagreements could be addressed. As Congresswoman Crockett departed the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room, the impact of her exchange with Senator Graham was already reverberating beyond the immediate proceedings. Congressional staffers could be seen huddled in the hallway, discussing what many were describing as a textbook example of effective congressional testimony. By that evening, clips of the exchange had begun circulating widely on social media and cable news programs. Political analysts from across the spectrum noted the effectiveness of Crockett's approach, particularly her decision to respond to repeated interruptions, not with matching combativeness, but with documented evidence of inconsistency. What made today's exchange remarkable wasn't just that Congresswoman Crockett stood her ground, observed a veteran CNN political analyst. It was her methodology, responding to interruptions by citing the interrupter's own words, rather than escalating the confrontation. That approach is virtually impossible to counter effectively. Major newspapers the following morning featured headlines highlighting the exchange. Crockett silences Graham with his own words and Washington Post, and House members' preparation turns tables in Senate hearing, New York Times. Several outlets published side-by-side comparisons of Graham's statements from 2018 and his current position, noting the apparent reversal based on which party controlled the White House. For Crockett, the aftermath brought significant professional recognition. Congressional colleagues from both chambers reached out to express admiration for her handling of the situation. A senior House Democrat told reporters, "Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated what effective oversight testimony should look like: thorough preparation, composure under pressure, and the ability to redirect confrontation towards substantive discussion." More surprisingly, several Republican representatives privately communicated their respect for her approach. One conservative congressman told a Capitol Hill reporter, "I may disagree with her policy positions, but that kind of preparation and professionalism commands respect across the aisle." She didn't try to embarrass Graham. She used his interruption as an opportunity to refocus on substance. Beyond the immediate political reaction, Crockett's handling of the situation began informing congressional training sessions. Within weeks, the Congressional Research Service had incorporated clips of the exchange into orientation materials for new members, highlighting effective strategies for maintaining control during confrontational hearings. University professors teaching courses on government, law, and public policy similarly adopted the exchange as a case study in effective testimony techniques. A Georgetown law professor told her students, "Notice that Congresswoman Crockett didn't just prepare her affirmative case. She anticipated specific objections and researched the historical positions of her likely questioners. That level of preparation transformed what could have been a hostile exchange into a substantive policy discussion. For Graham, the aftermath proved more complex. Initial social media reaction largely portrayed the exchange as an embarrassment for the veteran senator, with hashtags like "Yo, Graham silenced" trending briefly. However, his pivot to a more constructive approach after being confronted with his previous statements allowed him to partially recover from the setback. In a Fox News interview the following week, Graham addressed the exchange directly. "Look, in Washington you sometimes take different positions depending on the circumstances. Congresswoman Crockett came prepared, and she made some valid points about consistency. Where we still disagree is whether these specific procedures are appropriate in today's political environment." This acknowledgement, neither fully embracing his earlier position nor completely retreating, represented a careful attempt to navigate the aftermath of being caught in an apparent contradiction. Perhaps the most significant outcome emerged 3 months later when the Senate Judiciary Committee released a modified proposal for judicial nomination procedures. The revised framework included timeline guidelines that, while less stringent than those Crockett had advocated, nonetheless established expectations for consideration of nominees within reasonable periods. In announcing the compromise, Chairman Durbin specifically credited Crockett's testimony. The thoughtful presentation by Congresswoman Crockett helped focus our committee on the practical impacts of procedural delays rather than abstract institutional arguments. The resulting framework better serves the judiciary while respecting the Senate's constitutional role. Graham, as a senior committee member, stood alongside Durbin during the announcement. When asked about his earlier objections, he responded, "The compromises in this framework address my primary concerns while acknowledging legitimate issues about unnecessary delays. Sometimes it takes a forceful advocate from the other chamber to help us find middle ground." This public acknowledgement represented remarkable growth from his initial dismissive interruptions during Crockett's testimony. While clearly not a full adoption of her position, it demonstrated how her effective advocacy had shifted the conversation from confrontation to compromise. For everyday Americans watching government proceedings, Crockett's approach offered something increasingly rare in political discourse, an example of how preparation and evidence can sometimes overcome partisan entrenchment. Comment sections across news platforms reflected this sentiment, with one particularly shared observation noting, "I don't care which side you're on, watching someone respond to interruptions with facts rather than just trying to talk louder is refreshing." The legacy of the exchange extended beyond the specific judicial nomination procedures at issue. It demonstrated a model for effective advocacy in polarized political environments: thorough research, calm delivery, strategic use of inconsistencies, and willingness to engage constructively even after effectively countering an opponent. As future congressional hearings faced similarly contentious issues, the Crockett method became a reference point for members preparing for testimony, a reminder that sometimes the most effective response to interruption isn't matching intensity but presenting incontrovertible evidence that refocuses discussion on substance rather than process. This approach, substantive preparation over performative confrontation, represented exactly the kind of professionalism that many Americans hope to see more often in their governing institutions. In that sense, the legacy of the exchange wasn't just about who won a particular moment, but about demonstrating a path toward more productive political discourse, even in highly charged partisan environments. If you found value in this analysis of effective congressional testimony, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. For more coverage of pivotal moments in American politics, check out our other videos examining how preparation and evidence can transform political discourse.